G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 14th of July 2005. I'm your host, the author, David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood of Cain, Power Games, Into the Elsbound, and The Erotic Tales from the Empire. Part 1 coming soon. Well, thank you to all those patrons who support the channel. All my links are in the link tree. And my upcoming books, the draft, is actually on my writing Patreon. Now, before I get to the news, there has been some YouTube channels who've said stuff like about Zelensky, which I don't agree with. I don't believe he's a hero. He's totally manufactured. I believe, and rumours only, that he spends most of his time out of Ukraine. They call him Mr. Homeless, okay? European leaders say he shows up on their doorstep all the time, particularly in Poland and Germany. He's not fighting for the survival of his country. He's fighting to... How do you say it? Because people don't want to believe it. He's fighting for the right to murder Russians. He started this whole mess. Well, technically he did not start it. So the mess started with his boss and the CIA with the 2014 coup. With successive governments unable to deal with the corruption in Ukraine because it is so big. And Zelensky promised to fix the corruption. Zelensky, in his own campaign speech, said that the whole Ukrainian economy is based on borrowing money they won't pay back. He even acknowledged it's one of the reasons why Russians don't like them. We're always asking for the Russians for help, but we give nothing in return, he said. He excluded the so-called rebel regions from elections. He excluded Russian-speaking people from elections. He shelled civilians. Just because they rebelled doesn't mean you go rounding up everybody who speaks Russian and torture them. But that goes on not just in Ukraine. It goes on in Pakistan, India. You know, Modi's had opponents arrested too, you know. But China's the worst offender. So is Mexico. Mexico's pretty piss poor too on human rights. You look around the world, most countries are not civilized, and they hate it when you point that out. Now, some are getting better at it. I mean, look at South Africa. The corruption is institutionalized. It's supported en masse. While others are saying, look, we can't keep going on like this. And I think a lot of them, they're mistaken that Brexit is going to save them. Because a lot of them blame the West for the corruption. But the corruption, and has been pointed out time and time again, isn't communism or fascism or it's all socialism. Every socialist government is corrupt. Because once they get into power, they don't want to give it up. And they'll do anything to win elections. And as people rightfully pointed out, Zelensky's a socialist. But he's a democratic socialist, comrades. He's on our side, comrades. He's party of the people, comrades. And that's the problem, isn't it? The selfish American who doesn't live in Ukraine and won't live in Ukraine. sorry, it's not just the selfish American. There are more socialists supporting Zelensky in Europe than in America. But selfish socialism is nothing but socialism is nothing but socially acceptable gluttony, greed, envy. And why is it socially acceptable? Because the poor justify it by saying, but we're poor. But most of you socialists sip champagne and want the government to fund their lifestyle as government employees. Because again, it's not just greed and envy, it's also gluttony. And one of the biggest gluttons in the world right now is the media. Because once upon a time, the mainstream media was flush with cash because it was the only way to mass market. Now, one of the reasons why, and I think we have a Ukraine war, is the media lying about the situation in Ukraine since 2014. It's not a revolution of dignity. That's Orwell. That's straight out of Orwell. Call it something that it is not. I forget exactly how they described it in 94. I think he just basically called it doublethink and moved on. But it is. It's hypocrisy. But socialism has the dialectic. It actually openly admits that they believe in two things at the same time. That two things can be true. Which is totally stupid. But that's every cult has a absurdity. And doublethink is the absurdity of socialism. The Guardian, who couldn't guard a cup of warm piss. They're not the guardians of democracy. They're the pathetic little wimp flinging rocks from the sideline and running away when the spotlight is put on them. They are cockroaches. And it's amazing that these cockroaches who whined about the war in Gaza, whined about the war in Afghanistan, whined about the war in Iraq, Vietnam, Korea, you name it, they whined like little girls who ice cream cone fell over. Where, mummy? My ice cream, mummy? My democracy, mummy? But the my democracy crowd suddenly forget democracy when it comes to Zelensky and his one-party state. It's like their support for Ceausescu until he was so out of favour that even the socialists don't like him. Alright, so what are the key events? The key events is that woman, if she pulled the trigger, that gun will hit her in the face or wrap around her neck and strangle her. Same with this idiot. You do shoulder it, but it's up and over and under so that your arm, trigger discipline, gun down, straight under the arm. That's why they invented and why aren't they using the modern 3-point sling? And why are they using short wooden stocks on an AK? Because they're cheap Chinese knockoffs. That was actually is that AK-57? That's actually a Czechoslovakian, not an AK-47. That's actually a Czech weapon. And it was created for tanks because they couldn't get the longer barrel out. They abandoned them. Flooded the world with these useless, crappy, folding stock rip-offs. By the way, the folding stock wears out very quickly. And this guy, who's he protecting from? And who's this guy protecting from? The sniper on the hill would Donk this guy, nobody saw it. 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 And then they turn around and go, what? And then suddenly the ambush is complete as they just get wiped out. No trigger discipline. And this is the problem with civilian armies, okay? It's the use of quantity over quality. But once you start armouring civilians to fight on the battlefield, you can't complain about civilian deaths because you're putting them in harm's way. So, Ukraine is pretty much authorising Russians to kill civilians because they're now trying to organise a massive army against Russia. Remember, the last time... Yeah. Sure, this is what Russia did to Germany. But Russia still had a large enough army armed with proper weapons. Whereas these are just larpers with makeup and their Sunday hat and they're walking... they don't even feel adequate. At least she's got proper shoes on. Yay, we're out for a jog. Look at me in my bright coloured clothes in the woods playing soldier. Talk about LARP. Yeah. Talk about dumb LARPers. But it's all dumb. Again, a lot of the stories are repeats over and over again. Look at it. This is what? 8 hours ago? This was the same story yesterday. Literally the same story as yesterday. They're rearranging the stories, but they're the same thing. Trump is going to make an announcement soon. Every day. Always going on and on. It's like the media are trying to pressure Trump into doing what they want him to do. Again, another Russian Secret Service agent arrested. Oh, wow. At least they finally killed a military target. Wow, they actually admitted that Trump's... Sorry. So, look, they finally admitted that Trump is the only thing keeping Ukraine afloat. Okay? Europe hasn't provided enough arms, and they said, well, it's platitudes. But here, it's extraordinary people. They're not. Those are not extraordinary people, okay? They're fucking retards. They're morons. They're crooks, as far as I'm concerned. A country of crooks. Liars and warmongers and war profiteers. Who merely want to leech off the rest of Europe. And yeah, as I said, France and Germany want their cheap food, so they're quite happy to let Ukraine leech off them as long as they get cheap food. But now they're facing a crisis in Eastern Europe saying, wait, you made us jump through all these hoops, you made us arrest a bunch of people, you made us change our laws, whereas Ukraine, you're just going to give them a free pass. Why? Because they kicked Russia in the testicles for you? And a lot of people in Europe believe Ukraine is maybe only 26%, but Ukraine is getting what they deserve as far as some people are concerned. You know, they had a chance at peace, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and they refused it. But if Russia took your land is the only whateverism they could talk about. But America gave guarantees. That's the problem when you sign guarantees. It never takes into account the little country creating a war. And the majority won't stand up to Ukraine and say, but you started it. You had an agreement with Russia to go your separate ways. You were leasing land to Russians. Russians have lived there for centuries. You were leasing the whole Black Sea oil deal started falling apart because Ukraine started selling their oil off to third parties and buying elections with taxpayer money, and then making promises. And then, of course, Ukraine was the centre of human trafficking and all these problems, and it just goes on and on. Until the point where, the people keep complaining about corrupt governments, but they never hold them to account. Then, of course, you had Biden and Burisma and the mess with firing of prosecutors. Now, Ukraine is trying to invade Russia again because they need leverage. We need leverage for future peace negotiations. But you said yourself, Zelensky, that you won't negotiate with Russia until you're in a position of power. And you're never going to be in a position of power. So, fighting continues. And strikes on Kharkiv. And as we can see here, anything that quite resembles what they hit. No, they say in Sumy. What? It's not Sumy. It is Sumy. Sorry. What? Oh, there's Kharkiv. Sorry. So we got hits in Sumy. Gosh, when the map zooms. Alright, so move. Alright, Sumy, Kharkiv. Sorry about that. Now it's again. Right, Kharkiv, which there's been no breakout, but stalls. We've seen stalls before, and they're deliberate, and I've explained many times, but for the new subscribers, the Russian army will take the high ground, or at least the position where they have a lot of field in front of them, and for days, sometimes weeks, sometimes months, and in one case, over 2 years, they let the Ukrainians come to them. And suddenly, they'll move up to the town, and then they'll Bakhmut. They admitted the whole point of Bakhmut was the fact that people dispute this, but the Russians lost, I think, between around 5,000 with another 15,000 wounded, but they inflicted over 50,000 casualties on the Ukrainians, mostly dead. And this was because they wouldn't advance. Instead, they let the Ukrainians dig in and and because they dug in, it made them easier targets. Because artillery duels over cities are very difficult. Alright, so as you can see, most of the front, all the way down to Chavez Yar is pretty much, again, static. Now, previously we saw big gains here, and it's come to, again, because the Russians went around and cut these towns off, they fell easy once they cut them off. But then they have to engage in clearing operations, and that takes days, sometimes weeks. And while they do that, they'll stall, allowing either, unfortunately, other areas, they switch to fighting to other areas, and which in part is meant to draw Ukrainians off or force them to retreat to other areas. It doesn't always work. So you're going to be left with little pockets of resistance around, in which Russians can't, be everywhere, and it's a long front, and, strategically, people think it might make sense to do the Call of Duty thing and have as many people on the front line as possible, forgetting about the tactics of range. The realities of war is, this ain't Call of Duty, son. Okay? And Call of Duty ain't real. Call of Duty doesn't show you the fact that for every Japanese or for every German or every Italian you killed, you had one wounded, one dead. Same with the Russians, but the Russians greatly outnumbered the Germans. Now, Russians have advanced here, allegedly. Not much, but there's, advancement. They've advanced north of, but you can see, they've taken a huge chunk. As I said they would, they'd go around this town to cut off supplies out of here. They will cut this off because they still have to defend. So they're pretty much bringing up more artillery and men here and here and here, and will basically lay siege to this, and this will crumble over time, but it will crumble. In the meantime, there are other areas, and there will be advances in other areas up this way. Possibly, the way it looks is they'll hit this first up here before any of this falls. But again, it'll be once the Ukrainian, this is cutting off the Ukrainians' retreat here, forcing them up here. So this greatly weakens the Ukrainians, because now they have to go get through here. Although they could go through here, but then they're under fire. So yeah. And then Ukrainian commanders have to worry about whether they have to reinforce here, as the Russians could go up here and lay siege to this and come across here. And if they come across here, start laying siege to this puts all this down here at risk, puts this under pressure, this under pressure. Every day, the commanders are looking at changes to the battlefield. And remember, the Russians, they've done this before. They've fought multiple wars to defend Ukraine again, starting with the losses in Napoleon. Sure. And again, Russians point to history and say, we're not the aggressor. And that's the problem, isn't it? France and its glory. France and its glory. And this is all over again. For the glory of France. For the glory of Germany. But Germany and France at the people's level are more worried about the bloody illegals and all the so-called immigrants taking over. Europe needs to clean up its own backyard and get off this merry-go-round of pride. But, of course, you all know, pride the original sin. All right, so Battle Group Centre has undergone its assessment. So I thought this would be the end of the month. But this is ahead of the rotation. This is nothing. This is common. Inspections of units to make sure that they're in fighting and a fighting force and fighting strength. See what equipment works and doesn't work. Find out why from the front. You know, why these different drones aren't making as big a difference as they thought they would. Some obviously have, but don't forget, as the number of enemy vehicles decreases, you know, the countering Russian drones has increased. You know, the amount of electronic warfare has increased. Now, we don't see all of the equipment, and we're not going to see all the equipment until after the war anyway, what was used and wasn't used. But what we do know is that staff members of the Zaporozhye nuclear plant have come under Ukrainian drone attack again. This is actually a Russian-owned reactor, Russian-owned operation, and Russian-staffed. Ukraine nobody hates Russia more than Lindsey Graham. Not even Zelensky is this, you know, Putin derangement syndrome. But it is. This is why we have a war. Putin derangement syndrome. Okay, so the German defense minister has ruled out giving more Patriots and more Taurus missiles. When they said long-range supplies, they were talking about artillery, not air defences or Taurus missiles. They already sent 3 out of the 12 they once had. They only have 6 operational left. They started with 12. They're down to 6. 2 are in Poland, 1 undergoing maintenance or training. It's too few. NATO has capacity goals, and yeah. And there is that, the threat that if they do send Tauruses, it makes them a direct participant because they're apparently guided by German satellite relays. Now, Ukraine has accused the New York Times of lying. And Zelensky wants more weapons. Now, the New York Times, this is rare for the New York Times. Ukraine turned a corner when they invaded Kursk, but it's now a place of desolation and death. Russians are back in control of the Kursk province. Now Ukraine never seized all of Kursk. They seized a small amount of Kursk, but whole villages were flattened. Tens of thousands forced to flee their home. A few thousand were stranded. Some of them had been evacuated. Others did not survive. Many are waiting to see if their homes can be rebuilt. Maybe years before some can come back to live. It was a surprise incursion, and the Ukrainians quickly overran Zaduza. Small town, which was a transit station for natural gas. The Ukrainians took a swath of the nearby. Fighting raged. But as I said, They were there to steal the gas. More than 300 people killed by Ukrainian military, with 600 missing. Probably that cannot be independently verified as dead, but you know they're dead. Many of them children. Many residents, as you can see. Whoops, sorry. Where's the children? You know, not many left, eh? You know what happened. You know the crimes that Ukraine did. Everybody knows what the Ukrainians did. Nobody wants to talk about it. It wasn't just the Ukrainian. They didn't just kill the civilians and leave them dying in the streets. They also shot all the animals. Yeah. When the Ukrainians overran Susa, they shot they shot the Russians as well. They were caught in their barracks. They were overran. It happens. But to murder men, women and children. Ukraine, now you know why Russia won't accept Zelensky's platitudes. You know why Russia is angry. And Zelensky will never pay the price because qualified immunity. Just like Biden's anger over the actions of Saudi Arabia. Yet the actions of Saudi Arabia are no different from the actions of Biden when he took out, now I forget the name of the commander, but he took out a, was it Hamas or Hezbollah commander? No different. You gotta stop with this one-sided politics that my side can do what it wants and when it wants, and the other side can't and must abide by our rules. You can't have rules if you won't abide by them. Look at that gout-infested. I'm not a liberal. I'm not a Democrat. But this guy is a gout-infested relic of the Cold War. Who just can't see past his own decades of hatred. For people who aren't even alive anymore. But Ukraine calls this Russian propaganda. The New York Times, despite the evidence of Ukrainian war crimes, killing civilians, he's a piece of shit who wants to conduct more deep strikes on Russia and will do anything possible to bring the war into the Russian territory. But you can't act like a hero and talk like a warlord and expect accolades. And I hope that more people will wake up and realise that Zelensky's a piece of shit. He's a retard. And most governments around the world are run by retarded, absolute they got walking around with blinders on, thinking they can do what they please because Uncle Sam will bail them out. And isn't it amazing that the people who talk the biggest about America not being the world police are demanding that America be the world police in Ukraine? Our units continue to destroy the occupiers. Sounds like, sounds like one of those cheap war movies. We are winning on all fronts. We continue to We continue to push back the Russian aggressor. Poland attacked us. We have to defend ourselves. That's how you all acted. That's how the left act. And I don't get why so many on the right just put up with this shit. But I think it's because so many on the right have been living paycheck to paycheck for so long. And everybody talking about how you have to be diplomatic, and I'm sick of diplomacy. You tell evil to his face that he's an evil piece of shit. That he's not a good person, that he's not defending Ukraine, he's destroying Ukraine. And that he started a war. And that killing Russian civilians is unacceptable. But the left, remember, the left whined constantly about civilian deaths in Vietnam, even though they were armed. And here again, they're trying to create the same situation. Where we can do anything. We can put armed civilians on the front lines and then complain when they get killed. Because they're civilians. The moment you pick up a gun, you are not a civilian. And if you're out of uniform, you should have no rights on the battlefield. Because you're a terrorist. If you think terrorist tactics are justified because you're invaded, then why is it, don't you understand the principle of do unto others whatsoever? It's not if you're the good guy, you could do unto others. No. It's about the good saying, if you're going to be a terrorist, we're going to hit you with everything. We're going to have no rules, son. If you're going to fight without rules, Ukraine, then you expect and should expect the Russians, who, in their mind, are liberating Russian-speaking people from your persecution. And doesn't matter what you believe. I'm sick of people and their beliefs. Because what you believe does not affect the war. If you believe Zelensky's a hero, it doesn't affect how the Russians see him whatsoever. You have to accept how the Russians view him and wonder why the Russians view him that way. And how the Russians got to that point of attacking Ukraine. And then maybe you can unravel the war in your own mind and go, you know what? They're not occupying Ukraine. They're liberating it. Just like America was liberating Iraq or trying to liberate Afghanistan. You have to accept that if you do something, other countries will start doing it. And eventually they'll start doing it to you if you don't stop. Because they will continue to rally against you. Because you do not see their rights, you do not see their grievances, and all you care about is your political narratives, that will be used against you. Ukraine and its security guarantees. How childish and selfish when they gave nothing to the people of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics for over a decade. Nothing but secret police and death squads. It's amazing that the left will whine about death squads but tell you lies about the death squads in Brazil and Venezuela. They ignore the death squads in Venezuela. They're going on about death squads in Argentina and Brazil. Ooh, right-wing death squads. What about all the left-wing death squads? Look at Venezuela. Look at China. Look at North Korea. Look at the death squads in Ukraine. Oh, that's right. They're recruiters, comrade. So the media continues to be complicit in a war that should have ended and could have ended if it wasn't for Zelensky's obstinance. Zelensky had a peace deal. Now Ukraine is going to lose more territory and we inch closer to a nuclear conflict just because this man cannot think beyond himself. Always, he is identifying as the Ukrainian president when he's not. He's calling it my country when it's not. He's a deeply disturbed individual who completely cannot function without attention and is constantly seeking approval of others. And Macron is a pathetic little boy with his abusive husband. Germany is suffering an abusive relationship with Europe over its past. Well, Europe pretends that it doesn't have a past and destroys itself. Look at Sweden, once the third safest country in the world. It's now one of the most dangerous in Europe thanks to mass migration. Because the left cannot reconcile their beliefs. They have to believe that their narratives can change people. And that they are so enamored with their narratives that they are perfect and that they can solve any problem. The only solution to the world's problems is to put the world's problem childs, put Africa aside, let Africans kill each other, let the Middle East kill each other, cut them off, drive them out. We don't need the Middle East for oil anymore. We have Russia. We don't need the Middle East. But so many infantile, prideful, emotionally damaged children run countries because they are so good at getting attention. They're so good at promising you everything. You'll have pensions. It's the land of milk and honey. We can afford to give you free health care. No, you can't. You're 36 trillion in debt, America. Act like it. Europe, trillions in debt. Its population in decline because women say there's too many people on the planet and then bring in more people into their country. Because they say, we need doctors and lawyers. And then they bring in factory workers because they want their cheap goods. And who's going to pick our crops? Because all they care about is their comfort. And who's ever going to give them the most praise and approval for being harlots and vine swingers? The world is destroying itself over greed, gluttony, and envy. And Ukrainians, of course, it's always men who are paying the ultimate price for the greed, envy, and narcissism of the feminist. While the effeminate race around getting elected because I got smooth voice. I please the ladies. Ha ha ha. Yeah, I'm not winning friends and influencing people. I'm bringing you the truth. And thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please help get the truth out there. Support me on Patreon. Buy my books. Buy my merch. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you all for listening. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.